who films police gets kicked out of a press conference for not being real media. Then months later, he's arrested on camera for doing the exact same thing, filming. That YouTuber is Justin Pulliam, and what happened next turned into a federal First Amendment case that could change what rights creators like him actually have because he won.
Okay, BZ Watchdog. So, BZ Watchdog was alerted to the city of Hillsborough because of an interaction that someone he knew had with one of our police officers. This person is not a journalist. Journalists do fact checking for a lot of things. I don't really look at all this stuff, but from what I have seen, it is the vast majority of things listed as facts are not factually true.
Welcome back to the BZ Watchdog News Network, where once again reality is crashing headfirst into the excuses of small-town government officials who still think a camera, a microphone, and a YouTube channel somehow do not count when the truth starts getting exposed. Today, we are diving into a lawyer's video breaking down Justin Pulliam's federal lawsuit win. And let me tell you, this ought to send a chill straight through every city hall, police department, and backroom good old boy network that keeps pretending people like myself, other YouTubers, First Amendment auditors, and citizen journalists are just a bunch of nobodies with cameras. That fantasy is falling apart fast. Because when people report, record, document, investigate, and then disseminate that information to the public, that is journalism, period. Not when the government approves of it. Not when city managers feel comfortable with it. Not when some town attorney says they do not like being filmed. Journalism does not require permission from the very people exposed. And Texas towns like Hillsborough better wake up and smell the coffee before they walk themselves right into a very similar lawsuit. Because this old attitude of we decide who the press is exactly the kind of arrogant nonsense that gets taxpayers stuck holding the bill when public officials cross the line. Before we get into this video, make sure you head over to America's Attorney and subscribe to his channel, because this is where the video came from, and without him posting it, we would not have Justin's attorney speaking directly about the case. And while you're at it, smash that like button, drop a comment, share this everywhere, and subscribe if you have already not done so, because sunlight is the best disinfectant, and around here, we are going to keep turning the lights on.
Tyranny, corruption, extortion. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. BZ Watchdog News Network.
Justin Pulliam isn't your traditional reporter, and that's exactly why this case matters. He runs a YouTube channel, that's pretty cool, where he films police activity, covers local government, and adds his own commentary, often critical of law enforcement. Often critical of law enforcement? Is he single? For years, he's been out there with a camera capturing moments traditional media usually misses, especially routine police encounters that never make the news. And that's the key. His work lives in that space between journalism and accountability, where raw footage lets the public decide for themselves what actually happened. So this case isn't just about one creator. It's about whether the government gets to decide who counts as real media in the first place. You looking at me?
Wait, is this play about us?
Starts in July of 2021 when police in Fort Bend County are responding to a high-profile discovery, a submerged vehicle connected to a missing persons case. Justin Pulliam shows up and starts filming, just like any other reporter would. Officers eventually direct everyone to a designated area for a press conference where members of the media are gathering. Pulliam goes there too, standing alongside traditional news crews, cameras rolling. But as the sheriff arrives and prepares to speak, something changes. Instead of treating Pulliam like the rest of the press, the sheriff points him out and orders officers to remove him, saying on camera that Pulliam is not part of the local media. What happens next is subtle, but it matters. Officers don't arrest him. They walk him back about 80 feet, far enough that he can't meaningfully hear the press conference or participate in it. He's told he can still film, but just from back there. Meanwhile, every other reporter stays up front asking questions, getting direct access, doing their job. And that's the problem, because the only real difference between Pulliam and the rest of the press is what platform he publishes on. The department's own policy excluded social media from its definition of media, and that's exactly what gets used against him in that moment. So the second incident is where this case goes from concerning to serious. In December of 2021, officers are responding to a mental health call on private property, and Pulliam shows up to film. He's not rushing the scene, he's not interfering, he's standing back, recording. He even has permission from the property owner to be there. At one point, an officer tells him to stay back, and then another officer steps in, orders him across the street, and when Pulliam questions why, the situation escalates fast. Within seconds, the officer starts counting down 5, 4, 3, and then arrests him for a completely made-up reason, which the officer calls interference with public duties, but that's not real. It didn't happen. Here's what makes this critical. Other people are standing in roughly the same area, and they're not arrested. Pulliam never moves closer to the scene, never physically obstructs anything. And by the time he's handcuffed, he's already backing away. That's where this stops being about a disagreement on the scene and starts becoming a constitutional issue. Because if filming the police without interfering is protected by the First Amendment, then arresting someone for doing exactly that raises a much bigger question. Was this about enforcing the law or shutting down speech that the officers didn't like? After those two incidents, Pulliam filed a federal civil rights lawsuit under Section 1983, arguing that what happened to him wasn't just bad policing, it was unconstitutional. From the press conference, he alleges violations of his First Amendment rights and equal protection, arguing he was singled out and excluded simply because he wasn't considered real media. From the arrest, he claims both a free speech violation and First Amendment retaliation, saying he was targeted and arrested because of his filming and his criticism of law enforcement. To win those claims, Pulliam had to prove a few key things: that he was engaged in protected activity like filming, that the officers took action against him that would deter a reasonable person from continuing that same activity, and that their actions were motivated, at least in part, by his speech. And then there's the biggest hurdle in almost every civil rights case: qualified immunity, which protects officers unless the law was clearly established at the time. So even if something feels wrong, and even if a court later agrees it was wrong, Pulliam still has to clear a very high bar to actually hold anyone legally responsible. Wow. When I say it like that, it sounds like he's going to need some really good lawyers. Stay tuned. Then the case moves into the phase where everything slows down, but it kind of matters more. Both sides spend months building the record, filing motions, submitting video evidence, and asking the court to rule in their favor without a full trial. Pulliam pushed for a summary judgment, arguing the facts are clear and his constitutional rights were violated. The county and officers pushed back, arguing their actions were justified and at a minimum protected by qualified immunity. And then comes the twist, because the court doesn't just pick a side. Like so many judges, the court split the baby. On the press conference, the court comes down clearly in Pulliam's favor, holding that excluding him because he wasn't part of the local media violates the First Amendment. The judge makes it explicit. The Constitution doesn't draw a line between traditional journalists and someone reporting on YouTube. Whew, it's good to hear. That kind of speaker-based distinction triggers the highest level of scrutiny, and the county couldn't justify it. Some of Pulliam's claims are granted summary judgment, others are dismissed, and parts of the case narrow as it moves forward. By the time the court issues its later findings, it concludes that the arrest itself lacked a lawful basis. I want to say no Sherlock, but I'm going to let my editor take care of that. And it was tied to Pulliam's filming. This is where I wanted to go straight to the people who actually litigated this case, because the rulings here raise some real questions. I spoke with the attorneys representing Pulliam from the Institute for Justice. This isn't your typical law firm. They're a nonprofit public interest group that focuses on constitutional rights cases, especially involving free speech, government overreach, and civil liberties. They built a reputation taking on cases that challenge the limits of government power, often representing individuals against state and local officials in exactly these kinds of First Amendment fights. So when a case like this comes along, whether the question is whether the government gets to decide who counts as media, this is right in their wheelhouse.
I was not involved with his case from the very beginning, but the Institute for Justice was involved with his case from the very beginning. They helped him work it up into a complaint and file it. I came in the middle of discovery, and we kind of went full throttle from there into motions briefing and to trial. There was a motion to dismiss at the very beginning of the case. That's right. And obviously, the case was not dismissed. One claim was a Fourth Amendment claim, but the rest of the First Amendment claims proceeded to trial.
What was the real takeaway from that split ruling for you?
there were two rulings. The first is the summary judgment ruling, and that was on the press conference exclusion. And at the press conference exclusion, we got summary judgment granted in our favor. What continued to trial was this retaliatory arrest. The only thing that didn't make it past the MTD stage was a Fourth Amendment claim about whether you needed firsthand knowledge for the affidavit for an arrest and warrant.
How important is it to you that the court's recognition that a YouTube journalist has the same First Amendment protections as like a journalist in traditional media?
Well, it's important to me, but I think it's more important to the country. I mean, especially at a time when more folks are reporting on government interactions using grassroots reporting, their own cameras, going straight to social media, going straight to YouTube or TikTok. It's really important that folks who are on the front lines filming what our law enforcement officers and our government does have the same rights as someone who works in a traditional media like a newspaper or a TV station. And quite frankly, with TV stations and newspapers not having the same resources and not being able to be everywhere, it's really important for the right of the press and accountability for the government for folks on the streets to have the same rights.
I 100% agree. I am super excited about the fact that courts are seeing this. And I like my vision is that I want everyone to know what their rights are and to be able to say, I know that I'm allowed to do this, and to bring accountability to all of these interactions with government.
From your lips to God's ears, Josh, I like your vision. Let's make it a reality.
One of the things that we talk about a lot on the channel is how basically body cams are like there's constitutional rights up here, and then just below that is the value of body cams, because it gets rid of the he said, she said about what happens in these disputes.
That's true, Josh, but here what happened is Justin Pulliam had his own body camera, his own footage. The officer actually didn't have any body camera. They had dash cameras, right? But the officers themselves didn't have body cameras. So here it's evidence. It shows the evidence how important it is for you to have your own record, your own camera footage, your own body camera footage if possible, because that's really what mattered here. I mean, Justin went to a criminal trial. His footage was able to contradict the officer's testimony about what happened at the criminal trial. And we used that footage at the civil trial to prove that the officer's affidavit that led to his indictment and why he was arrested was just false compared to everything else that was going on. So body cameras are important, but having your own independent record is also important. And I know from some of our other cases at IJ that sometimes officers will manipulate their own body camera or their own dash camera footage so that there's no record that contradicts their own story.
Yeah, we've been seeing some of that. We just did a video about that on something from New York City a couple of weeks ago. The cops are out there doing that. It's wild. I'd like to ask you a question. You may have already previewed what your answer is based on what you just said. But on Justin's arrest, can you explain what you feel like the court focused on in deciding that there was no lawful basis for this allegation that he was interfering with law enforcement function?
Yeah, so there were two kind of main things that I think the court focused on. The court focused on the officer's own actions, what that officer was doing, because the officer's whole story was, it was such a dangerous situation that I couldn't spare any moments, any single second to respond to Justin Pulliam's question, and then I needed to arrest him immediately for not, immediately leaving the scene. The officer himself didn't act like there was any safety concern. His back was to the scene. If he was really afraid someone was going to shoot someone, he wouldn't be standing with his back to the scene. He walked calmly. Then after he arrested Justin, he fiddled with Justin's equipment on the hood of his car in the line of sight of any potential shooter. And then there were other people on the scene, social mental health workers who were there, the mom of this mentally ill man, and Justin's own wife. And the sergeant, now lieutenant, didn't take any action with regard to those particular people. And you would think that if it was really a safety issue, he would be concerned about everybody on the scene. But instead, he focused on Justin Pulliam. And in response to Justin Pulliam's question about why he needed to leave the scene, and if it was really for safety, the sergeant then just arrested him without any warning.
Like in summary, you can say that the court found that the arrest was just motivated by Justin's speech or his speech rights.
That is correct. I mean, I think you're almost quoting the opinion there. Judge Hanks ruled that the arrest was motivated by the lieutenant's hostility to Justin's speech.
How hard is it, and maybe it's on a case-by-case basis, but how hard is it for your group to prove in a First Amendment situation that there is that retaliatory element or that intentional denial of someone's First Amendment rights?
It's difficult, Josh. I'm not going to lie. It is difficult. I mean, as you well know, the deck is stacked in officer favor. You've got various technical legal doctrines that prevent you from getting through the motion to dismiss stage. You've got qualified immunity that can be raised at the motion to dismiss stage and later at the trial stage, and obviously is something that can be appealed if they find the officer doesn't have qualified immunity. And then, quite frankly, the First Amendment retaliatory arrest case law is the accountability ball. So we're in this together.
This case makes one thing clear. The First Amendment doesn't come with a press badge requirement. If the government can decide who counts as real media, it can decide who gets to ask questions and who gets pushed out. And if that line doesn't worry you, it should.
So there you have it. Yet another example of government officials and law enforcement learning the hard way that the Constitution does not suddenly disappear just because they do not like the person holding the camera. What this case showed loud and clear is something a whole lot of small town officials have been desperate to deny for years. You do not get to decide who is and is not a journalist simply because their reporting makes you uncomfortable. Justin Pulliam was not excluded because he was wrong. He was not targeted because he was interfering. He was not arrested because justice demanded it. He was targeted because he was visible. He was recording. He was asking questions. And worst of all for them, he was creating a record the public could actually see for themselves. This is what this always comes down to. These people love transparency right up until transparency shows up with a camera and starts documenting what they are doing in real time. Then suddenly it is, oh, that person's not real media. That person is not a journalist. That person is a problem. No, the problem is not the camera. The problem is not the YouTube channel. The problem is not the citizen journalist. The problem is officials who think the First Amendment only applies to people they approve of. And that is why this case matters so much, because this was not just a win for Justin Pulliam. This was a warning shot to every city, every police department, every sheriff's office, and every puffed up public official who still thinks they can play gatekeeper over speech, press access, and public accountability. You cannot. You do not need a fancy newsroom. You do not need a corporate media logo. You do not need permission from City Hall. And you sure as hell do not need approval from the very people being exposed. If you report, if you document, if you investigate, and if you disseminate that information to the public, you are engaging in journalism, period. And towns like Hillsborough and plenty of others just like it better start paying attention, because this arrogant little game of pretending YouTubers, auditors, and independent reporters have no rights is exactly the kind of stupidity that ends with taxpayers footing the bill for lawsuits that should never have happened in the first place. That is the real kicker here. The officials make the bad decisions. They violate people's rights. They double down on the lies. And then when the lawsuit comes, guess who pays for it? Not the egos, not the excuses, not the spin machines, the public. So hopefully people are paying attention. Hopefully other independent journalists are paying attention. And hopefully government officials are paying attention too. Because the message is simple. The First Amendment does not belong to traditional media alone. Freedom of the press is not reserved for people with a press pass and a network contract. And accountability is not optional just because it is convenient. That is why we keep recording. That is why we keep asking questions. That is why we keep publishing. And that is why we are not backing down. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you smash that like button, drop a comment, share this everywhere, and subscribe if you have not already done so. And do not forget to go subscribe to America's Attorney as well, because without that video and that interview, more people would still be in the dark about what this case really means. I'm BZ, this is BZ Watchdog News Network, and remember, as always, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I will see you in the next video.
Tyranny, corruption, extortion.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant. BZ Watchdog News Network.
BZ Watchdog.